So I look forward to your reports after the talk. We talked about attuned speech last week. And I was thinking that was such an important topic that I'd probably talk again about it tonight, but I often don't completely choose where my mind wants to go. So I actually found it moving on to the topic of attuned action. And part of that is just something that I heard this last week. It was actually at the Bodhisara board meeting. We were talking about this class and the notion of attunement rather than like right speech, attuned speech. And it reminded one of the members, Peter Corbett, of when he used to live at Sirius Community, which is an intentional community in Shutesbury. And when they would go out to cut down a tree, they would take a moment for attunement before they cut down the tree. And by that, they meant to take a moment to get in touch with its divine nature, its divine essence. I thought that was really quite important as an idea. So unlike what we tend to do in this culture, to stop and before we take something from nature, to reflect, to take a moment of presence with it. I'm not sure what you make of the notion of divine essence of things, but what I think it's pointing to is the way that things are, and they exist independently from our, whatever we want from them. It's so easy to relate to a tree just in terms of lumber, just in terms of wood, firewood or lumber that you want from it. What do you want from the tree? Or maybe you want it out of there. It's causing too much shade. So the tendency of the mind, especially in this culture where nothing else is cultivated, is to think of everything in terms, when it comes to nature, everything in terms of one's own benefit. But to take a moment to actually honor the tree, to actually reflect, okay, this is actually a being, a living being, which has its own life and purpose. And it doesn't just exist to satisfy my desires. It has its own existence, its own purpose. It has a beauty to it. It has a dignity to it, if I can use that word. It's so often just used of people. It has a dignity to it. To stop and be with that for a moment. It is the nature of nature that it's constantly feeding off everything else. It's just the nature of nature. Grazing animals eat plants. Predators eat the grazing animals. The microbes and bugs in the soil eat the dead carcasses of the animals. And the fungi digest the wood, the lignins in the wood that just died, and turn that back into something that is soil, which then gets transformed into the plants which are eaten and so forth, in this really amazing kind of interdependence. All these things are going on. And within that, we may take lumber, but it's a shift in consciousness, an important shift in consciousness that happens when we actually are conscious of that relationship and the dignity of everything within it. So that's my sense of whatever was happening there in the Sirius community when they took a tree. And so, I think when you reflect on attuned action, it's that quality that we're aiming for, that quality of presence in our actions, which are respectful of that interdependence and the dignity of everything within it. If you, for instance, you're working with the first precept, not to take life, you sometimes go on retreat and you see people kind of gently encouraging the spider to leave the room, gently encouraging the mosquito to move away, trying not to just reflexively, kill it. Because when we just do that unconsciously, there's a way that we condition in our mind this sense that I'm the center of the universe, I matter, and nothing else really matters. There's a way by doing something as simple as not killing insects that one begins to kind of honor that sense that, okay, this world is shared by other conscious creatures who also suffer, feel pain, also want to live. That's where we're at. That's the actual kind of place we're at. And it's not as though it's really possible, humanly speaking, to never take life. We eat life. Even vegetarians, are eating life. Plants are eating dead things. We're eating the plants. For those who eat meat, there's a real life that's taken. Often that's made invisible to us by the whole system by which it's gotten. And so, right action can kind of bring us back into that, out of the trance of turning everything into a commodity, everything non-human into a commodity. And of course, we humans are capable of turning other humans into commodities too. I don't mean to say that's not true. Sometimes we just look at people for their usefulness, their labor, for example. So I also, I was thinking about, the precepts, just the spirit of the precepts. The second precept is to not take what is not given. And lately I've worked with that primarily in the sense of not taking things for granted. That to take things for granted is in some way to take what is not given. I don't know that I can quite twist the word around to mean that. But it's my sense of the spirit of it, that gratitude is the right relationship with things, is an attuned relationship to things as they actually are. And it comes out of knowing, not just intellectually, but really on a heart and gut level, knowing that one doesn't, how can I put this? That everything is given. My very life is given. I didn't create my life. It took other human beings, took two other human beings to be precise, to create this life. I didn't create it. I didn't actually create this consciousness that I keep walking around saying me to. And, once I gave it a name, Mark Hart, I learned that. And I turned my head when somebody said that. But I didn't create this consciousness. I don't create this consciousness moment to moment. I could lose it, really. And even though I claim it as mine, I don't actually have control of it in the way that you'd think it would if it were mine, completely given. Or something called intelligence. It's also not mine. I use it, whatever that is, that figures out stuff, keeps track of stuff. this enormous kind of managerial capacity that I have. I was just thinking, I mean, today was just one of those days where there were just so many details flowing through, and something was tracking them. And, it remembered that, somebody's name should appear there on the schedule, and they didn't. And sure enough, I went into my email and saw that we had agreed to meet at this time, and I didn't write it down. But somehow this intelligence, like, kept track of all that. And, and then I say, I did it. Oh, who's the I? Really? It's just kind of amazing how all this works, that it works as well as it does. It's all kind of given, and we learn how to sustain it. We learn how to treat it well, this body, this mind, hopefully. But to live in the consciousness of just the givenness of everything means that gratitude is just readily at hand. And that itself kind of loosens this grabbing tendency that we have as human beings to want to grab and hold on to things and make them mine. Even things, crazy things like making this consciousness mine, as if I even created it. Kind of crazy. But then, we divide up the world into things that we think we own and don't own. So something like a property line becomes this whole thing when it's a complete convention. The ground doesn't know that there's a line there. It's purely human beings that divide up everything into property lines and pay money for them. And money itself is completely conventional too. There's not necessarily anything there. It's kind of fascinating. There's nothing really there when it comes to money. You used to be able to, like, hold a chunk of gold and then, oh, I've really got something. I've got a chunk of gold. But money isn't that way anymore. It's purely kind of these value transactions. And it's all based on agreement, really, and trust. All this sort of exchange that goes on. And there's something that, we get deluded about in that notion of, whatever this kind of exchange of resources, what's ours and what's not ours. And so the second precept honors that. Don't take what's not yours, basically. Don't take what's not given to you. So that people, are respectful of these agreements, these sort of financial agreements of ownership. But on a deeper level, I just want to say that the resources of this earth don't really belong to anybody. They don't actually belong to anybody in essence. We've worked out a system of ownership so that in some ways things are manageable. We can exchange things better. We have money. You have a sense of what you give and what you get in that exchange. And life is very much an exchange. So we've worked out something about that. But we've also become somewhat entranced by it. I remember hearing someone talk about, I don't know if you know who Lynn Twist is. She's a philanthropist, and she founded a number of different organizations, actually. But the one I was listening to was about this organization to help indigenous people in South America control their own land and fate. And so she has this amazing story about having like a shamanic experience where she was called to this tribe, which didn't really have much contact with the outside at all. And they were waiting for her when she got there because they needed some help. And somehow they called her spirit in. So she ended up bringing a young person, I think a young man from this tribe, to live with her in the United States. And she described what an amazing thing it was to bring this person who had never handled money into the American life, where everything costs something. And all of the exchanges are handled by money, when none of that was present in their lives in the Amazon. And it just kind of like, oh my goodness, it's like an astonishing thing to imagine someone suddenly walking into the world we've created, and not really quite getting what all this is about, and the way that our consciousness has been conditioned by money. It's profound. And just imagining a consciousness that had never been conditioned by that. Of course, there was obviously a notion of exchange, because it's human and it's natural to, exchange things among people, and for, to have some sense of a comparable amount of work for a comparable amount of some other work. But none of that involved this exchange of money. And I can only imagine that a consciousness like that would see things about us that we can't see ourselves. The way that we've made ourselves servants of money, when it's really about how best to distribute resources, when it comes down to it, for the kind of the flow, if I can say, the flow of goods and services through the community. That's kind of the essence of it. And so in the middle of that, we have this Buddhist precept kind of pops up, not to take what's not given. And it's a curious thing, because I think it can mean more than just don't steal, don't take somebody else's stuff that's been kind of conventionally parceled out into mine and yours. For example, we're not living in a sustainable way. In other words, there's no way the human race can live at the rate that it's living, of consuming resources, and continue to thrive. I have a friend who once put it this way, and I think it wasn't original to her. I think she was repeating somebody else. She said, I've been a thief in my life. I've been a thief of the world's resources. I've taken way more than my share. And I'm like, whoa, thief. We don't think of ourselves as thieves. But in some way, perhaps that's true. Perhaps we do live with far more resources than we need to, which is not sustainable. I just want you to kind of take that in a little bit. I don't have immediate solutions to this. I know that the thing that concerns me the most is the way that we, emit carbon dioxide and methane, greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and it's going to cause utter havoc with the environment. And we are the environment, my friends. We are the environment. So when we say it's going to cause utter havoc with the environment, I'm talking about the human race too, And I'm talking about intense misery that we've already kind of put in place, and it's only getting worse. And so, at this moment in time, when it would seem like an emergency, it would seem like an all hands on deck moment. You look around and it's not happening. People aren't acting like it's an all hands on deck moment to change their consumption patterns. And I'll just give an example. And I have to say, I'm including myself in this mess. I went on a trip this last weekend to Mystic. My wife's cousin is there, and she has both Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, if you can imagine. And her husband wanted to get away for the weekend, so we went down, and she's in a care facility, so it wasn't like we were completely in charge, but she gets very anxious in the evenings when she sundowns, and it really helps to have people around. So we were there, and because it was Mystic, we we went to the Seaport. It's a wonderful museum. Highly recommend it. But I noticed, okay, this is a museum that educates people about climate change, among other things. You know, and there in the parking lot was not a single charging station, which I mentioned to the person at the ticket counter, and she said she'd bring it up in a meeting, and I was grateful that she was willing to take it another step. But it's sort of like, folks, it's 2023. Where are we? We're taking what's not given. You know, it's not given to us human beings to pollute this atmosphere to the point where half the species are unlikely to survive. That's not actually, it doesn't feel like it's ours to take. And yet, we're in such momentum of a certain sort that we can't even let that into our consciousness, you know? And that's only one environmental issue. There are more. There are more. I think I think you all understand what I'm talking about, but I do feel it's a matter of integrity to consider this, how we live our lives. What are our consumptive patterns? And I will say that I am no paragon here around this. I do have solar panels. I do have mini splits to heat the house, but they won't heat it in the coldest times. And I have a plug-in hybrid, but not an electric vehicle, and we have a gas-powered vehicle still, and we're working towards getting that replaced. But you know, it's not always so cut and dried. So it's not like I'm saying this in judgment of anybody, but I'm just kind of pointing to the possibility that you consider this as important. Your grandchildren will thank you. Children will thank you. You'll actually thank yourself because you probably will be alive to see some pretty awful things coming. And I think about it almost every day. When I have my tea out on the deck and watch the sun come into the sky, you know, or the light come into the sky, you know, I try to attune myself in some way to this big, almost unthinkable reality that is the truth right now about our position in 2023 with respect to this planet and all the creatures on it. I try to stay in some way attuned to that. We're also all trying to live our lives, you know, and we're not all in control of everything, obviously. But there you go, not taking what's not given. I think I'm going to stop there. I mean, it's of the 5 precepts I spoke already about speech. I'm not sure that I have anything, but we'll see in the coming weeks. I have anything too much about not harming through sexual conduct. I might have something to say about intoxicants that lead to heedlessness. We'll see. I kind of play this by what's in my heart to speak any given week, and we'll see what comes up about those, about that kind of questions of attunement. And certainly you're always welcome to bring them up in a question and answer period if you wish. Okay.